Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. At 3:50 a.m., Liam Hargrave's phone ripped through the mountain silence. An HOA president demanded his keys, claiming emergency authority. Minutes later, SUVs, lockpicks, and a fake inspector appeared at his gate. What began as intimidation was about to ignite a federal conspiracy. The piercing shriek of my landline phone cut through the mountain silence like a chainsaw at 3:50 in the morning. I bolted upright in bed, my former search and rescue instincts kicking in instantly. Emergency calls at this hour usually meant someone was dying on a cliff face or lost in a blizzard. My hand shot to the receiver before the second ring. "Liam Hargraves," I answered, already swinging my legs out of bed. "This is Karen Weldon, president of Summit Crest Homeowners Association." The voice was cold, clipped, and absolutely devoid of any emergency urgency. "I need you to bring me the keys to your gate and all your farm buildings immediately." I blinked hard, wondering if I was still dreaming. "Excuse me, you heard me correctly. This is an emergency safety inspection of your property. The HOA has received reports of suspicious activity, and we need immediate access to conduct our investigation." The absurdity hit me like a slap. I'd been living on this 600-acre spread for 15 years, since inheriting it from my father, and in all that time, no HOA had ever claimed jurisdiction over my private mountain property. My land sat a full mile above their precious resort community, separated by Federal Forest Service territory. "Lady, I think you've got the wrong number. My property isn't part of any HOA, and it's 4 in the morning. Call back during business hours if you have legitimate concerns." "Don't you dare hang up on me." Her voice sharpened like a blade. "I'm not asking, Mr. Hargraves. I'm telling you. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll send our security patrol up there, and we'll take what we need for the safety of our community." The threat crystallized everything. This wasn't about safety inspections or emergency procedures. This was a raid. Plain and simple. I'd heard rumors about the new HOA president down in Summit Crest, how she'd been eyeing the natural springs on various properties, talking about community resources and greater good bullshit. My property had the cleanest, most abundant mineral spring in the entire valley. "Let me get this straight," I said, fully awake now and reaching for my tactical pants. "You're threatening to trespass on private property and break into my buildings because of some mystery reports. The safety of Summit Crest residents is my responsibility. Your isolated location makes it a perfect hiding spot for vagrants, drug operations, or worse. We have every right to ensure our community's security." I almost laughed. Karen Weldon clearly had no idea who she was dealing with. 12 years of mountain rescue had taught me to read people fast, and this woman reeked of desperation disguised as authority. She wanted something from my land, and she was banking on intimidation to get it. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, pulling on my boots with one hand. "You're going to hang up, go back to sleep, and pretend this conversation never happened. If you or anyone else sets foot on my property without a legitimate warrant signed by a real judge, you'll be met by an armed landowner who knows his rights." "How dare you threaten me?" "I'm an elected official with legal authority. You're the president of a housing development HOA. You have exactly zero authority over property that was never part of your community." I grabbed my Remington from the gun safe and checked the chamber. "And that threat you just made about sending people up here, that's conspiracy to commit burglary. I hope you recorded this call because I sure as hell did." The line went silent for several seconds. When Karen spoke again, her voice had dropped to a deadly whisper. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Mr. Hargraves. If you think your little mountain hideaway puts you above the law, you're about to learn otherwise. We'll be there within the hour." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Then my training kicked in completely. Time to gear up and get ready for war. I threw on my tactical gear with the efficiency of someone who'd done it in genuine emergencies countless times before. Black cargo pants, sturdy boots, and a dark fleece that would blend with the shadows. My service radio went on my belt alongside my mag light and backup battery pack. The Remington got a full magazine check. I wasn't planning to shoot anyone, but mountain folk learn early that looking prepared prevents most problems from escalating. Moving through my house in practiced silence, I grabbed my night vision monocular from the emergency kit and my digital camera with the telephoto lens. If Karen's people were really stupid enough to show up on my land, I wanted documentation of every face, every license plate, and every illegal action they took. I slipped out the back door and immediately spotted them. Two black SUVs with those ridiculous reflective Summit Crest HOA logos were parked just outside my main gate, their engines still running. Even from 200 yards away, I could count at least 6 figures moving around in high-visibility safety vests. They looked like a highway construction crew, except highway crews don't typically gather outside private properties at 4 in the morning. Staying low and using the natural cover of the pine trees, I worked my way closer to the fence line. My property's main gate was a solid steel affair with reinforced posts, built to keep out bears and mountain lions, not suburban wannabe cops. The chain and padlock system looked simple enough, but appearances were deceiving. Dad had installed a GPS tracker inside the lock mechanism after some idiots tried to steal his ATV 15 years ago, and I'd upgraded it with a motion sensor that sent alerts straight to my phone. Sure enough, my phone buzzed silently as I watched one of the vest-wearing morons approach my gate with what looked like professional lock-picking tools. This guy wasn't some HOA volunteer. He moved like someone who'd done this before. I raised my camera and started shooting, the telephoto lens pulling in clear images of his face and technique in the ambient light from their vehicle headlights. That's when I saw her. Karen Weldon climbed out of the lead SUV like she owned the entire mountain. Mid-50s, blonde hair pulled back severely, wearing an expensive outdoor jacket that screamed, "Weekend warrior who's never spent a real night outdoors." She barked orders at the other 5 people, pointing at different sections of my fence line and gesturing toward my buildings. I pulled out my radio and switched to the channel Dave Martinez used when he was on duty. Dave and I had worked together on dozens of search and rescue operations, and he was one of the few cops in the county who understood that mountain property owners weren't weekend hobbyists. We were serious people protecting serious land. "Dave, you there? It's Liam up on Hargraves Ridge." The radio crackled softly. "Copy, Liam. You're up early, even for you. What's the situation?" "I've got 6 individuals attempting to breach my property gate, claiming HOA authority they don't possess. One's actively working my lock with professional tools. I've got photos, and I need backup." "Jesus Christ, on my way. Keep documenting everything. Stay out of direct confrontation until I arrive. ETA 15 minutes. The lockpicker stepped back and shook his head at Karen, apparently frustrated by the security system. She stormed over to him, and even from my position, I could hear her voice rising in anger. 2 of the other people started walking the perimeter, looking for weak spots in the fence line. Time to let them know they were being watched. I triggered my property's perimeter lighting system. 6 military surplus floodlights that could illuminate a football field suddenly bathed the entire gate area in brilliant white light. The effect was immediate and satisfying. All 6 intruders froze like deer, hands shooting up to shield their eyes from the sudden glare. "Good morning, trespassers," I called out through my bullhorn, staying concealed in the tree line. "You're on private property, you're being recorded, and law enforcement is en route. I suggest you return to your vehicles and leave immediately." Karen's response was exactly what I'd expected from someone who'd never been challenged in her little kingdom. She stepped directly into the light, hands on her hips, and screamed back at the darkness where she thought I was hiding. "This is an official HOA security inspection. We have reports of vagrants and illegal activity on your property, and we're here to investigate." "Show me your warrant," I shouted back, still recording everything. "Show me one piece of legitimate legal paperwork that gives you authority over private mountain property." Her response told me everything I needed to know about Karen Weldon's respect for the law. "I don't need a warrant from some hillbilly hermit. The authority of this community supersedes your property rights." I grinned in the darkness. She'd just confessed to conspiracy and illegal trespass on camera with audio. This was going to be easier than I'd thought. The floodlights had turned my gate area into an impromptu stage, and Karen was playing her role perfectly, the entitled villain who genuinely believed her own authority fantasies. I watched through my telephoto lens as she gestured wildly at her crew, clearly frustrated that her intimidation tactics weren't working on some hillbilly hermit who dared to challenge her. That's when the real show began. A third vehicle pulled up behind the SUVs, a white sedan with official-looking markings that I couldn't quite make out from my position. A man in what appeared to be some kind of uniform climbed out, carrying a leather portfolio that he handed directly to Karen. She nodded smugly and marched toward my gate with renewed confidence. "Mr. Hargraves," she called out, waving the documents above her head, "we have official authorization for this inspection." This is your final opportunity to cooperate before we proceed under emergency authority. I zoomed in with my camera and felt my blood turn to ice water. The uniform was a decent fake. County-style patches, official-looking badge, even a radio on the belt. But something was off about the proportions, and the badge caught the light wrong. More importantly, I recognized the man wearing it. 3 years ago, during a particularly difficult mountain rescue, I'd worked with County Inspector Thomas Riley to investigate a fatal climbing accident. Riley had been thorough, professional, and unfortunately for Karen's current scheme, he'd died in a car accident 18 months later. I'd attended his funeral myself. The dead man walking toward my gate was carrying paperwork with Riley's signature and seal. "Interesting uniform," I called back, adjusting my position to get better photos of the fake inspector. "Tell me, officer, what's your badge number?" The fake inspector looked nervous, glancing back at Karen for guidance. She stepped forward aggressively. "We're not here to play games with your paranoid questions. Open this gate immediately, or we'll open it ourselves." I had them dead to rights, but Dave's voice echoed in my head. "Keep documenting. Avoid direct confrontation until backup arrives," so I decided to give them enough rope to hang themselves with. All right, I called out, making my voice sound defeated. "Let me see that paperwork first. Slide it under the gate." Karen's triumphant smile was visible even from my concealed position. She practically skipped over to the gate and shoved the documents through the gap at the bottom. I emerged from the tree line, keeping my rifle casually visible but not threatening, and approached the gate from my side. The paperwork was impressively detailed: emergency inspection order, health and safety violations, even a clause about immediate access requirements for community protection. The county seal looked perfect at first glance, and someone had put real effort into matching the official formatting I'd seen on legitimate documents. But they'd made one critical error. The signature at the bottom belonged to Thomas Riley, complete with his official title and badge number. I'd kept a copy of the real inspection report from that climbing accident, and I'd know that signature anywhere. "This is very official looking," I said loudly, making sure my voice carried to all of Karen's people. "Inspector Thomas Riley, badge number 7492. "Tell me, Inspector," I looked directly at the fake officer. "How long have you been working with Inspector Riley?" The man's face went pale under the floodlights. We work closely with all county officials on community safety matters." "That's fascinating," I continued, pulling out my phone with deliberate slowness, "because I worked with Inspector Riley personally on a fatal accident investigation 3 years ago. Stand by while I give him a call to verify this paperwork." Karen's expression shifted from smug confidence to dawning horror as I made a show of scrolling through my contacts. The fake inspector took a step backward, and I could see 2 of the other crew members edging toward their vehicles. "You can't call him," the fake inspector stammered. He's not available at this hour." "You're absolutely right," I said, lowering my phone and looking directly into Karen's eyes. "Thomas Riley isn't available at this hour. He's not available at any hour, because he's been dead for 18 months. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of my floodlights and the distant rumble of Dave's patrol car climbing the mountain road. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish, while her fake inspector looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. "But here's what's really interesting," I continued, holding up the forged documents. "This paperwork is signed by a dead man, presented by someone impersonating a county official, and backed up by people who just attempted to break into private property based on fabricated emergency authority." I looked directly at each of Karen's people in turn, making sure they understood their situation. In Colorado, that's conspiracy, fraud, impersonation of a government official, attempted burglary, and criminal trespass. Federal charges if this crosses state lines, which I'm betting it does when we trace those fake seals and documents. Dave's patrol car crested the hill, emergency lights painting the pine trees in alternating red and blue. Karen's crew was now openly panicking, with 3 of them already heading for the vehicles. But Karen herself stood frozen in the floodlight glare, clutching the fake paperwork like a lifeline. The sound of car doors slamming echoed across the mountain as Dave and his backup officer approached the gate with the confident stride of people who actually possessed legitimate authority. Dave Martinez stepped out of his patrol car with the kind of calm authority that comes from 20 years of dealing with mountain troublemakers. His backup officer, a younger guy I didn't recognize, positioned himself strategically near the vehicles, while Dave approached the gate with his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "Evening, folks," Dave said, his voice carrying the particular tone cops use when they already know someone's in deep trouble. Mind explaining what brings 6 people to private property at 4:30 in the morning? Karen immediately launched into damage control mode, stepping forward with the fake paperwork clutched in her hands like a shield. Officer, this is an internal community matter. The HOA has received credible reports of dangerous activity on this property, and we're conducting a lawful inspection under emergency protocols. Dave's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes that meant he was. Shifting into full cop mode. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification from everyone present, starting with you, and I'll need to examine those documents you're holding. The fake inspector made his first smart decision of the evening and raised his hand slightly. Officer, there seems to be some confusion here. We were told this was a routine community safety check. Told by who? Dave's backup officer asked, pulling out his notebook. And what's your name and official capacity? That's when things started falling apart fast for Karen's crew. The lockpicker had already made it back to one of the SUVs and was trying to look invisible. 2 others were edging toward the second vehicle, clearly hoping to avoid the conversation entirely. The fake inspector looked like he was contemplating a sprint into the forest. Nobody's leaving until we sort this out, Dave announced, reading the situation perfectly. Sir, he addressed the fake inspector directly. I need to see your credentials and badge. The man's hands shook as he reached for his wallet, producing a laminated ID card that looked official enough in the dim light. Dave examined it with his flashlight, then looked up with the expression of someone who'd just solved a puzzle. This badge number belongs to Inspector Thomas Riley, Dave said slowly. Problem is, I worked Tom's funeral detail 18 months ago after his car accident on Highway 6. The fake inspector's face went from pale to green. There must be some mistake in the paperwork. Oh, there's a mistake, all right. I called out from my side of the gate. Dave, check the signature on those documents Karen's holding. Same dead man. Karen's last-ditch attempt at maintaining authority was almost impressive in its desperation. This is harassment. The HOA has legitimate concerns about illegal activities on isolated properties, and we have every right to investigate. Dave held up his hand for silence. Ma'am, what you have is a group of people attempting to gain access to private property using forged government documents and a man impersonating a deceased county official. That's multiple felonies. His backup officer was already calling for additional units while systematically photographing the vehicles, license plates, and every person present. Karen seemed to finally grasp that her carefully planned raid was turning into a criminal investigation with herself as the primary suspect. You don't understand, she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone that was completely different from her earlier arrogance. This property has valuable natural resources that should benefit the entire community. One person can't just hoard clean water and mineral springs while families down the valley struggle with contaminated wells. There it was. The real motive finally coming out. Not safety, not vagrant concerns, but good old-fashioned resource theft dressed up in community service rhetoric. So you decided to forge government documents and impersonate dead officials to steal a man's spring water? Dave's incredulity was perfect. Lady, you're looking at federal charges for this level of stupid. The fake inspector finally cracked under the pressure. Look, she hired us, all right? We're private security from Denver. She told us it was a civil property dispute, and the paperwork was legitimate HOA authority. We didn't know about the dead guy. Karen spun on him like a furious cat. Shut your mouth, you idiot. You signed a confidentiality agreement. Confidentiality agreements don't cover federal crimes, Dave's backup officer observed helpfully while continuing to document everything. That's when I noticed something interesting in the back seat of the fake inspector's sedan. A laptop bag and what looked like surveying equipment. These people hadn't just come here to intimidate me into opening my gates. They'd come prepared to conduct a detailed assessment of my property and its resources. Dave, I called out, pointing toward the sedan. You might want to check what other equipment they brought for this safety inspection. The backup officer approached the vehicle with his flashlight and immediately called Dave over. Sheriff, we've got professional surveying gear, soil testing kits, and what looks like water quality analysis equipment. Karen's face went from desperate to defeated in the span of about 3 seconds. Her carefully planned resource grab had just become evidence in what was clearly going to be a major criminal case. Ma'am, Dave said formally, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and criminal trespass. You have the right to remain silent. As the handcuffs went on, Karen made one final attempt to play the victim card. This is persecution. I'm an elected community leader trying to protect residents from a dangerous hermit with guns. I couldn't help but laugh. Karen, you just spent the last hour trying to break into my property with fake government documents and a crew of criminals. The only dangerous person here is you. The arrest of Karen and her crew should have been the end of it, but as Dave loaded the last of the conspirators into the patrol cars, his radio crackled with a message that changed everything. Federal agents were requesting immediate contact regarding a multi-state investigation into fraudulent property seizures. Within 6 hours, my quiet mountain farm had become the center of what FBI agent Maria Martinez described as the most sophisticated private property theft ring we've encountered in the Rocky Mountain region. Agent Martinez arrived with a team of 4 other agents, a digital forensics van, and search warrants for every property connected to Karen's HOA operation. The scope of what they found in Karen's office made my situation look like small-time amateur hour. Filing cabinets stuffed with forged documents for 47 different properties across 3 counties. Professional surveying reports on mineral rights, water sources, and development potential for lands that Karen's organization had no legal connection to. Most disturbing of all, detailed plans for something called Operation Mountain Sweep, a coordinated campaign to seize control of high-value rural properties through manufactured emergencies and fabricated legal authority. Mr. Hargraves, Agent Martinez explained as we sat in my kitchen reviewing evidence, you stumbled into the middle of a criminal enterprise that's been operating for at least 3 years. Karen Weldon wasn't just some power-hungry HOA president. She was running a sophisticated land grab operation with connections to development companies, corrupt local officials, and what appears to be organized crime. The evidence was staggering. Bank records showed that Karen had received over $2 million in payments from a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The money trail led back to a consortium of real estate developers who specialized in converting rural properties into luxury resort communities. My spring water wasn't just valuable for her personal spa dreams, it was the centerpiece of a $50 million development project that would turn half the valley into an exclusive retreat for wealthy urbanites. But the most chilling discovery came from Karen's personal computer. Detailed surveillance files on every property owner in the target area, including psychological profiles, financial vulnerabilities, and what the documents coldly referred to as elimination strategies for those who refused to cooperate. Elimination strategies? I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know the answer. Agent Martinez's expression was grim. 2 property owners who refused to sell their land died in what were ruled accidental deaths over the past 18 months. Harold Brennan fell from a cliff while checking fence lines. Janet Morrison died in a house fire that investigators blamed on faulty wiring. We're reopening both cases as potential homicides. The fake inspector, whose real name was Marcus Webb, had started talking the moment he realized the scope of what he'd gotten involved in. Webb was a former security contractor who'd been hired through a company called Mountain Safety Solutions, which turned out to be another shell operation funded by the same Cayman Islands money. His job was to pose as various government officials and present convincing paperwork to intimidate property owners into compliance. The woman is completely insane, Webb told the FBI during his recorded interview. She had detailed plans for your property going back 2 years, knew your father's death date, your military service record, even your daily routines. She'd been having people watch your place with binoculars from the valley. When the intimidation approach failed with other owners, she started talking about accident scenarios and natural mountain hazards. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. Karen hadn't just decided to target my property on a whim. She'd been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment to make her move. The natural springs on my land were just the beginning. The development consortium wanted the entire ridge, including the protected wetlands and wildlife corridors that my father had spent decades preserving. Agent Martinez showed me aerial photographs that had been found in Karen's files, professional drone footage of my property taken from angles that would be impossible without extensive surveillance. They'd mapped every building, every fence line, every water source, and every potential access point. Red markings on the photos indicated planned locations for resort buildings, golf courses, and spa facilities. The scariest part, Martinez continued, is how close they came to succeeding. If you hadn't fought back and documented everything, they would have moved to Phase 2, manufacturing a legal dispute over property boundaries, water rights, or environmental violations. They had corrupted county officials ready to rubber stamp whatever paperwork they needed. The corrupted officials turned out to include County Judge William Henley, who'd been receiving monthly payments through a consulting contract with one of the shell companies. Building Inspector Carol Parks had been approving falsified safety violations on target properties. Even the county assessor had been artificially inflating property values to force owners into financial distress. My role as a federal witness meant that I needed protection. Karen's organization had connections that reached far beyond her arrested crew, and the money involved was enough to make eliminating witnesses seem like a reasonable business expense. Agent Martinez assigned 2 agents to monitor my property while the investigation continued, and I was given a direct line to call if anything suspicious occurred. "This is just the beginning, Mr. Hargraves," Martinez warned as her team finished collecting evidence from my property. "When this goes to trial, you'll be the star witness in a case that could bring down a network spanning multiple states. These people aren't going to give up easily." That night, as I watched the FBI vehicles disappear down the mountain road, I realized that my quiet life as a mountain landowner was over forever. The simple property dispute I'd thought I was dealing with had turned into something that would require federal marshals, witness protection protocols, and testimony that could put dangerous people in prison for decades. But looking out at my father's land, at the springs and wildlife corridors that Karen's people had planned to destroy for profit, I knew there was no choice but to see this through to the end. The federal courthouse in Denver had never seen a case quite like United States v. Weldon and Associates. 6 months after that early morning confrontation at my gate, I found myself sitting in the witness box facing a courtroom packed with reporters, federal prosecutors, and some of the most dangerous people I'd ever encountered. Karen Weldon had assembled a legal team that probably cost more than most people made in a decade. Her lead attorney, a sharp-dressed shark named Jonathan Blackwood, had built his reputation defending organized crime figures and corrupt politicians. But even Blackwood seemed to understand that his client had left a paper trail so extensive that it practically prosecuted itself. Federal prosecutor Sarah Chen had spent months building an airtight case, and I was her star witness. As I raised my right hand to be sworn in, I could feel Karen's eyes boring into me from the defendant's table. She'd lost about 20 pounds during her time in federal custody, and the orange jumpsuit was a far cry from her expensive outdoor gear from that night at my gate. "Mr. Hargraves," Prosecutor Chen began, "please tell the court about the phone call you received at 3:50 a.m. on March 15th. I walked the jury through every detail of that night, from Karen's initial demands to the discovery of the forged documents. The prosecution had done their homework. They played the recorded phone call where Karen explicitly threatened to send her security patrol to take what they needed. Her voice filled the courtroom, cold and demanding, making it clear that this wasn't some misunderstanding between neighbors. But the real bombshell came when Chen introduced evidence item 73, Karen's personal planning journal, recovered from a hidden safe in her home office. The journal contained 3 years of detailed entries documenting her obsession with acquiring my property and dozens of others throughout the region. March 8th, Year 2. I read aloud from the journal. Hargraves' property remains the cornerstone of the entire project. The mineral spring produces 400 gallons per minute of perfect spy-quality water. Conservative estimates place resort revenue at $12 million annually once the hermit is eliminated and proper development begins. The word eliminated sent a chill through the courtroom. Blackwood objected, claiming the language was metaphorical, but Chen was ready with additional evidence. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to present evidence items 74 through 89, detailed surveillance files on Harold Brennan and Janet Morrison, both of whom died under suspicious circumstances after refusing to cooperate with the defendant's organization. The Morrison file was particularly damning. Karen's people had been watching Janet's property for months, documenting her daily routines, the condition of her electrical system, and even her late-night habits. The file included photographs of Janet's fuse box taken with a telephoto lens and notes about accelerant placement for natural-looking electrical fires. When Chen showed the jury crime scene photos from Janet's house fire, Karen finally lost her composure. She leaned over to whisper urgently to Blackwood, but the damage was already done. The jury had seen enough evidence to understand that they weren't dealing with an overzealous HOA president, but with someone who would kill to get what she wanted. Blackwood's cross-examination strategy was to paint me as a paranoid mountain recluse who'd misunderstood routine community safety procedures. It might have worked if the prosecution hadn't spent 5 days presenting evidence of the massive criminal conspiracy. Mr. Hargraves, isn't it true that you've lived alone on your mountain property for 15 years with minimal contact with your neighbors or local government? That's correct, I replied. I value privacy and self-sufficiency. That doesn't make me paranoid, and it certainly doesn't make me wrong about someone trying to steal my land. But surely you can understand how community leaders might be concerned about isolated properties being used for illegal activities. Chen objected before I could answer, but I was ready for this line of attack. Mr. Blackwood, if Karen Weldon had legitimate concerns about illegal activities, she could have contacted the Sheriff's Department, the DEA, or any number of actual law enforcement agencies. Instead, she forged government documents, impersonated dead officials, and planned to murder me if I didn't cooperate. Those aren't the actions of a concerned community leader. The prosecution's case got even stronger when Marcus Webb took the stand. Webb had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence, and his testimony revealed the full scope of Karen's operation. She had files on 47 properties. Webb testified, his voice barely above a whisper. Each file contained what she called an acquisition timeline. For compliant property owners, the timeline involved manufactured legal disputes and financial pressure. For resistant owners like Mr. Hargraves, the timeline included what she called permanent solutions. Webb described a meeting where Karen had shown him topographical maps of my property, pointing out cliff faces and unstable rock formations where a search and rescue accident could be staged. She'd researched my background as a mountain rescue volunteer and concluded that I would respond to fake emergency calls, making it easy to lure me into a fatal situation. She said mountain people die in accidents all the time, Webb continued. Nobody questions it when an experienced climber falls from a cliff or gets caught in an avalanche. She had detailed plans for making Mr. Hargraves's death look like he'd been trying to rescue someone and suffered an equipment failure. The courtroom was dead silent as Webb described finding climbing equipment in Karen's storage unit, gear that had been deliberately sabotaged with weakened ropes and damaged carabiners. The prosecution's forensics expert testified that the equipment would have failed catastrophically under normal climbing loads, but perhaps the most damaging testimony came from Karen's own financial records. The $50 million development project she'd been planning would have required destroying not just my property, but also protected wetlands, wildlife corridors, and Native American archaeological sites. She'd been willing to commit multiple felonies and murders to access that money. When the defense rested without calling Karen to testify, I knew Blackwood had given up on any hope of acquittal. His closing argument focused on requesting mercy for a woman who'd lost her way while trying to improve her community. Prosecutor Chen's closing was devastating. She methodically walked through each element of the conspiracy, connecting Karen's actions to a pattern of escalating violence that would have continued until every property in the target area was under her control. As the jury filed out to deliberate, Karen finally looked directly at me for the first time since the trial began. Her expression wasn't angry or defiant anymore. It was the look of someone who finally understood that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse completely. The jury returned after less than 4 hours with guilty verdicts on all 37 federal charges. Judge Patricia Vance had presided over federal criminal cases for 23 years, but even she seemed shaken by the scope of Karen Weldon's criminal enterprise as she prepared to deliver sentencing. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with victims' families, federal agents, and reporters all waiting to see justice served for what the media had dubbed the mountain land grab conspiracy. Karen stood at the defendant's table, flanked by her legal team, but Jonathan Blackwood's expensive suit couldn't hide the fact that his client was about to face the full weight of federal justice. The pre-sentencing report had painted a picture of a woman so consumed by greed and power that she'd been willing to murder innocent people for access to their natural resources. Ms. Weldon, Judge Vance began, her voice carrying the gravity of someone who understood the historical significance of this moment. In my decades on the federal bench, I have rarely encountered a defendant whose actions demonstrated such calculated disregard for human life and property rights. The judge methodically worked through each count, but it was her comments on the murder conspiracy charges that sent chills through the courtroom. The evidence shows that you orchestrated the deaths of Harold Brennan and Janet Morrison, two innocent property owners whose only crime was refusing to surrender their family lands to your development scheme. You then planned to murder Liam Hargraves using the same methods, showing a pattern of escalating violence that would have continued indefinitely. Karen's shoulders shook as the judge continued, but whether from fear or rage was impossible to tell. Her carefully constructed image as a community leader had been completely destroyed by months of testimony, revealing her true nature as a calculating criminal who viewed human lives as obstacles to profit. The financial scope of your conspiracy is equally staggering, Judge Vance continued. $50 million in projected development profits, built on a foundation of forged documents, murdered property owners, and corrupted government officials. You corrupted the very institutions designed to protect citizens from exactly this type of predatory behavior. The sentencing phase had revealed even more devastating details about Karen's operation. FBI forensic accountants had traced the Cayman Islands' money back to a network of international investors who specialized in what they euphemistically called aggressive rural development. Karen hadn't just been stealing land for local profit. She'd been part of a multinational scheme to acquire strategic natural resources across the American West. Judge Vance sentenced Karen's co-conspirators first. Marcus Webb received 8 years for his role as the fake inspector, though his cooperation had earned him the minimum possible sentence. The lockpicker got 12 years. County Judge William Henley, whose corruption had enabled years of illegal property seizures, received 15 years and permanent disbarment. But it was the sentences for the actual murders that drove home the true cost of Karen's greed. The prosecution had presented evidence linking her organization to 4 additional suspicious deaths across 3 states, property owners who died in accidents after refusing to sell strategic parcels of land. Karen Patricia Weldon, Judge Vance announced, "This court sentences you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole on the murder conspiracy charges. Additionally, you are sentenced to 25 years on each of the fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy counts, to be served concurrently." The life sentence hit Karen like a physical blow. She collapsed into her chair, finally understanding that her dreams of resort empires and mineral water fortunes had cost her everything. Blackwood immediately announced plans to appeal, but everyone in the courtroom knew it was a formality. The evidence had been overwhelming. In federal appeals, courts rarely overturned life sentences for murder conspiracies. But Judge Vance wasn't finished. The civil restitution phase of the case had revealed assets worth over $15 million hidden in various shell companies and offshore accounts. Every penny was being seized and distributed to victims and their families. "Mr. Hargraves," the judge addressed me directly, "this court awards you $4.7 million in compensatory damages, plus an additional $2 million in punitive damages to be paid from the defendant's seized assets. Additionally, the court recognizes your role in exposing this conspiracy and protecting other potential victims." The financial restitution was gratifying, but what mattered more was Judge Vance's final order: the complete dissolution of Summit Crest, HOA's security operations, and a permanent injunction prohibiting any HOA in the district from conducting property inspections, surveillance, or enforcement activities beyond their legal boundaries. As the bailiffs led Karen away in shackles, she turned back toward the gallery one final time. Her eyes found mine across the crowded courtroom, and for a moment, the mask of victimhood slipped completely. The look she gave me was pure hatred, the rage of someone who'd spent years planning my death and would now spend the rest of her life in a federal prison cell. Federal Agent Martinez approached me as the courtroom began to clear. "It's over, Liam. Karen Weldon will never threaten another property owner, and her network has been completely dismantled. You can go home and live in peace." But as I walked out of the courthouse into the Denver afternoon, I knew that peace would come with a price. The publicity from the trial had made my property famous, and I'd already received calls from journalists, documentary filmmakers, and, unfortunately, other criminal organizations interested in my land's natural resources. The war for my mountain might be over, but the victory had made me a target for anyone else who thought they could succeed where Karen Weldon had failed. 2 years after Karen Weldon's sentencing, my mountain property had transformed into something that would have made my father proud and simultaneously horrified him. The peaceful ranch he'd left me was now a fortress equipped with military-grade security systems, but it was also a symbol of what happens when ordinary people refuse to surrender to criminal intimidation. The compensation money had allowed me to upgrade every aspect of the property's defenses. Motion-activated cameras with facial recognition software monitored every approach route. Seismic sensors buried along the access road could detect vehicles from 2 miles away. The old wooden gate had been replaced with a steel barrier that could stop a truck, and the new sign bolted to it left no room for interpretation. Private mountain property, no HOA access, ever. But the most important change wasn't technological. 6 months after the trial, I'd married FBI agent Maria Martinez in a ceremony held right here on the land that Karen had tried to steal. Maria had left the bureau to start a private security consulting firm specializing in protecting rural properties from organized land grab schemes. The Hargraves Mountain Training Center had become a destination for property owners throughout the American West who wanted to learn how to protect their land from criminal organizations. We taught everything from legal documentation and surveillance detection to emergency response protocols and federal reporting procedures. Standing on my porch this morning, watching my pregnant wife train a group of Nevada ranchers in defensive tactics, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Karen Weldon's attempt to destroy my quiet mountain life had instead created something far more powerful, a movement of rural Americans who refused to be victims of corporate predators and corrupt officials. The mineral springs still flowed clean and abundant, protected now by both advanced security systems and federal environmental designations that made future development attempts legally impossible. Karen's dream of a luxury spa had become a conservation success story that would preserve this land for generations. Somewhere in her federal prison cell, I hoped Karen understood that her greed hadn't just failed. It had created exactly the opposite of what she'd intended,